Wake that ass up.
Early in the morning.
The Breakfast Club.
Yep, it's the world's most dangerous morning show, The Breakfast Club. Charlamagne the God, Angela Yee, and we have two special guests in the building, Mr. Roger Ferguson and Stacey Tisdale. Good morning.
Good morning.
everybody.
How are you?
I'm blessed, black, and highly favored, sir.
You sure are. That makes two of us.
Yep. Absolutely.
Well, it is time for another Wealth Wednesday.
It is. Happy Wealth Wednesday, everybody.
Yes. And so Roger Ferguson, you have him here with us, and you are the CEO of Tiaa.
That's correct.
All right, so explain what that is for people who don't know, and we're going to talk about things that are very interesting and used to be very scary for me.
All right, well, Tiaa is a 102-year-old company, and we specialize in financial services, particularly retirement, for people who are in the not-for-profit sector. So think of your college professor or a teacher maybe in a school or a doctor at a not-for-profit hospital. That's the kind of thing that we do, and we've been doing it for 102 years.
Wow.
All right,
Indeed.
so even and when you think about retiring, right, that's something that people are retiring later because they haven't been able to save up the money that they need. People are living longer. That's also an issue, so you need more money to be able to sustain yourself. So what are some of the issues that we have as far as figuring out how will I be able to retire comfortably?
Look, a number of issues, and you put your finger on it. First and foremost, people recognize now that they're going to be living a longer time, and so retirement is going to be with them for longer than maybe for our parents. The second challenge is in the old days, you go to work, you'd work at the same company for years, and they would give you what's called a defined benefit plan. That is not the case for most people anymore. So the second big challenge is now we have to save for our own retirement going forward. And the third big challenge is a lot of folks, even if they know how to save, aren't quite sure where to invest to get to a safe retirement.
Right.
And so there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of confusion. And we have discovered now that about half of Americans don't have access to a retirement plan at work, and many of them are not saving enough.
I mean, it's hard to think about retirement when you got to think about just living day to day.
Oh, that's right, but you got to balance both of them because you're going to be living 70, 80, 90, 100 years now.
I pray so.
And I hope so for you, too.
Thank you.
And for me, too, just to be clear. And so you really have to figure out how do you balance the day-to-day of paying your bills, paying off your student debt, which a lot of folks have, and saving for the future. And so we shouldn't pretend that it's easy, but it's absolutely doable. And I guess that's part of what we can talk about.
Now, Stacey, you always talk about how we are moving into a gig economy.
Absolutely.
Moving forward. And a lot of times, at work, you get this 401k, your company doesn't match for you. But what happens when we're in this gig economy with these baby millennials and they're not getting access to those type of plans, and now you have to actually invest yourself to save for retirement?
There's kind of a new definition of what financial literacy is. And as you mentioned, we're moving from a traditional capitalist model, excuse me, and we have the expert on that here. Roger was vice chairman of the Federal Reserve, which is, one of the most powerful financial positions in the world. So he's really the economic expert. But we're moving into a gig model because the old model didn't work for so many people. People were working hard, but they had student loan debt, so they couldn't save as much as they needed to. So within the next decade, you're going to have the majority of the U.S. workforce working as freelancers, entrepreneurs, as solopreneurs, and that brings about different challenges. It's hard enough for people of color to get a mortgage, to get a loan, but now you're going to have that whole unsteady income thing that comes with, that gig model. But what we're really seeing here, and I think what's really exciting for our community and for everyone, is technology is stepping in where the financial services industry and the government hasn't kept up. And we're seeing apps that allow you to do things like build credit. We're seeing apps that will help you manage your business. And when you look at the Black community, financial online service companies reduce discrimination by 40%. So where Blacks typically get higher rates for things like mortgages and loans, that whole fintech's, it's an equalizer. So I think that's really going to benefit our community. And I know today we're celebrating Dr. King.
Right.
And he was just so prolific. I think in 1963, he asked the government for a national jobs retraining program because the word he used, he said automation, meaning tech is going to replace jobs. And I think, one of the things I'm really happy that we're having this conversation today is because not that many people know that just before his assassination, Dr. King was about to drop everything and put his full attention on economic rights.
Empowerment. That's right.
What
That's right. Poor People's Campaign.
Yeah, and what he called a revolution of values. And then you're absolutely right, Charlamagne. He launched the Poor People's Campaign in 1968, which was aimed at providing economic rights for blacks and other groups. And he was assassinated just before he did that. And historians say that he was so afraid in his heart of hearts that the wealth gap and economic inequality could derail all of his civil rights efforts, because he understood if you don't have that piece, the rest isn't going to fall into place. And he was on it. He introduced an economic bill of rights to Congress, and which was a $30 billion package that called for infrastructure, job retraining, higher minimum wage, guaranteed income for people who didn't get it. And he was really
universal basic income.
Yes, yeah. Andrew Yang talks about all the time now.
Yeah.
Universal basic income.
And he really got that economic piece. And, you know, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was about to turn his attention towards equality, economics. And he'd be very proud of the wealth blacks have created, but we still haven't really seen someone come into that space to give us that lift. And that's why I call his assassination a major money moment in black history.
Absolutely. Stacey's got it absolutely right. And I think she's put her finger on something really important, which is this is about both what technology can do, but it's also about financial literacy at the individual level, because technology can be an equalizer, but you got to use it smartly. You got to choose the right tools. And you also have to know what really drives for financial security. And so I think we need to talk about both technology being part of the answer, but also individual responsibility and some understanding of what it is to take a job, if you have one, into wealth, and if you don't have a job, how you get one. So I think we need to have that whole discussion.
Why is the initiative called Resilience?
Because the story of black wealth, the financial history of blacks, is an incredible story of resilience, which Angela and I talk about a lot, and it's never told in that way. From the very beginning, blacks had money taken from them, from the Freedmen's Bank. We didn't have equal chance at things because of redlining. We've had all this systemic discrimination, but in the face of that, black households in the United States earning $75,000 or more are the fastest growing income group. We have black women, total bottom of the barrel, but black women are the majority owners in over 1 million businesses in the United States, creating $42 million in sales and $7.7 billion in payroll. So when you look at what's going on in the black economy, it is an incredible story of resilience, and we have that, but we haven't created the mindset to claim that wealth yet. And what we have an opportunity to discuss today, and I know what you're both touching on, is financial literacy.
Right.
And it's interesting. I have a financial literacy foundation, and I get asked a lot, there a crisis of financial literacy in the black community? And the numbers do tell one story. If you look at, scores from the Jumpstart Coalition, black students score a lot less on financial education test. If you look at credit scores, it looks like we're having a financial literacy crisis. But then the other story is the wealth that we've created, and, the fact that blacks have, I know some families who on very, very little income, below minimum wage, they get food on the table. They get their, kids dressed. All the wealth that women have created. So we are a story of resilience, and it's just expanding
so many obstacles in our way, too.
And we did this anyway. So it's expanding that definition of what financial literacy means. And again, Dr. King understood that, we typically talk about financial literacy in 2 or 3 ways. You got to get a financial plan. You have to understand your financial personality a little bit, and you have to set goals. But you can't even participate in that equation if you don't believe in your ability to achieve a goal. And that's that self-efficacy piece that he understood. He understood that, a holistic look at what financial literacy is there's a financial, there's a psychological, there's an emotional, but there is that spiritual element where you have to have hope, you have to have resilience. And we have that. And that's what people have to build on that. And that's why this campaign that we're doing is called Resilient.
I'm fascinated by you, Roger Ferguson, just your whole background, because as Stacey speaks on all those things, you were the former vice chairman of the Federal Reserve. And to get into a position like that is one of the most highest positions you can have in economy here in the United States. How did that happen for you? And I know after 9/11, you played an instrumental part in making sure that the economy push forward.
Sure. So absolutely. And it started for me in a way that sort of Stacey talks about, which is it started at home for me. My father was very focused on financial matters. He didn't have any money at all. He's one of those people that Stacey was talking about. He was a GS-7, GS-8 government worker, not highly compensated, but he was very interested in investments, and he's very much a self-taught person. He had grown up in the Depression, and the Depression got him very interested in how banks work. And he spent every moment that I could think of thinking about interest rates and taking his $500 from one bank to the other for a CD. And my mother was very interested in education. She said to me, stay in school for as long as you can. I learned from her that education is the one thing that society can't take away from you, regardless of what color you are. And all those things came together. I fell in love with economics. And you were talking about Dr. King. I was one of those people, I think, who was very influenced by one of the things he was doing before he died, which was also getting, blacks into the right kinds of positions in government. And so as I was growing up, in 1966, 1967, Lyndon Johnson appointed a guy named Andrew Bremer to be the first black governor of the Federal Reserve. Andrew was a story of resilience, the child of sharecroppers. And that was front page newspaper story for me. And so because of Andrew Bremer, 1966, 1967, and my parents, I fell in love with economics, got very interested in the Federal Reserve, and had the good fortune to be appointed in 1997 as the third black governor, and in 1999 as the first black vice chairman.
So you know what you're talking about, huh, Roger?
I hope so. I've been spending a lifetime doing it.
So what do you think it's going to take to close the wealth gap?
So look, I think there are three things that are going to take to close the wealth gap. One is and in closing the income gap. The wealth gap is driven by the fact that we don't have the income that we should. Second is using that income smartly, which is the issue around financial literacy, learning how to manage the money you have, be it small or large amounts. And the third thing is to know where the assets are that create wealth. Blacks are underinvested in a couple of things that really drive wealth creation, particularly over the last decade. We are underinvested in equities, for example, versus other folks. It turns out that small businesses are another way that white folks and others have created family wealth and passed it on from generation to a generation. So I think there's some things we can do to start over time to change the dialogue and to really close that wealth gap.
It's scary because some people will give you advice on what you should be investing in, but if you're not educated yourself on that, like for myself, I'm still trying to learn about. And Stacey's been really helpful to me.
She's so good. Don't let her be modest. This is a tiger.
But it's still a learning experience, right?
Absolutely.
Like all the time, people are coming at me with different things.
Right.
And just the other day, and I know you know about Vanguard, somebody was like, oh, you need to be invested in Vanguard, and that's something that you need to do. And then he sent me over his, the money that he's made and explained to me what he made last year, how it works. And, sometimes you get wary of things because you're not sure. There's so many different things you could be doing. How do you narrow it down and figure out what should I invest in?
So, look, you put your finger on a couple of points. One is the first thing is to have your own financial literacy, right? And do not trust, that brother-in-law, that neighbor, or that person who said, oh, I made so much money last year, because, they may have gotten lucky. It doesn't mean they're smart. The second reason that you have to think about what you want to do is your own life situation might be different. We talk about the risk that you are comfortable taking versus somebody else.
Right.
And so you have to be really smart about how you think about your own profile and what's really important to you. Having said that, there are a couple of rules that are really important, and I've heard them on the show a few times.
I'm ready.
Well, first is, all of us have to first start by managing our debt smartly, right? Because one of the great wealth destroyers is misusing debt.
Right.
And I know, because I've heard you talk about in the past, that, and I think you've talked about, Stacey in particular, your credit score really does matter. Because indeed, employers look at credit score. So it's not just your ability to get credit, but it also may influence your ability to get a job. So all that's in the debt management side of things. But before we go to that place, the other thing I really want to hit on is education. It turns out that, outcomes in terms of income, in terms of wealth, in terms of holding a job, whatever color you are, is heavily dependent on how you've done in school.
Right.
And it turns out now we've reached a stage where 90% of high school graduates get into college, but for blacks, only about 30% finish. For whites and others, it's more like 60 or more percent. And so we as a population have also got to learn, once you get into college, you have to stay in school and finish, because that is one of the things that's heavily correlated with good outcomes.
What about people that feel like that is not affordable for them? Because I hear that all the time. We get ourselves in debt also, having to pay back those student loans. And obviously, I always talk about the importance of education. I went to college and I encourage people. Some people will tell you it's not important. It causes more debt for you, and then you don't end up doing what you went to college to study, and things like that. And there's a lot of people that push that narrative also. We've had people on the show talk about that. But I've always felt like education is important because even statistically, it shows how you make more money when you get out of college with your degree. Right. And also just the network that you have access to once you graduate from college.
Right. And so, look, for me, it's a both-and story. I think you're exactly right on the benefits of going to college. Right. The statistics show, without a doubt, that people who are college educated have better economic outcomes. They have better life outcomes, better health outcomes. And so we shouldn't downplay the importance of finishing college. Having said that, absolutely right. You got to be smart about the debt that you take on. And so if you think about the job that you're going to have, that should drive you to think about how much debt you can reasonably afford. And where people get into trouble is twofold. One is taking on too much debt for the job they're likely to have. But the other thing that really drives individuals get into trouble is they take on debt and then they never finish college. Right. And they're in the worst situation. And so when you look at those who default on their loans, actually the average amount of a loan that's defaulted on is $9,000. It's not 300,000, 400,000 people talk about. But the folks who tend to default most disproportionately are those who didn't complete. And so the story is not that college is not worth it. The risk is you get too much debt for the job you might have, then you don't get a job at all because you don't finish. And so I think you have to do a little bit of both and don't dismiss the importance of finishing college, because it's one of the bases for building the kind of wealth we're talking about on this show.
There's great resources. We're talking about, how technology is kind of an equalizer at tiaa.org provides great resources for people. But education is very, very important. We emphasize that constantly. One thing that we have to talk a little bit about, that whole internal thing, what people believe about themselves, because I was just reading a really interesting study by researchers at Harvard, Yale, Stanford, and the Census Bureau, and they followed children for millions of children, and they found that black men, even those from wealthy families, and they were looking at, I think, $700,000 net worth and above, still make less money as adults than white men of the same demographic. So when you look at things like that, and when you see what people are seeing is, people who go to college and everything, they still have these disadvantages. What does that do to our belief system that would make people feel like, investing in the market is possible, like it's a good thing? And that's what we're talking about, what Dr. King could have, he got the importance of that part of it.
No, look, we should be very honest. I mean, the sad truth is that racial discrimination has been, a cancer on the society from the very, very beginning. And we shouldn't sit and pretend that we don't still confront discrimination in the workplace. And
That's right.
It is absolutely true that at every job level for the same education, blacks tend to have less outcome, lower wages. So let's be honest about that. Mm-hmm. Having said that, my view, and I hope the view of your listeners and others, is I don't let, the foolishness of another group of people undermine my own sense of what I can do. Mm-hmm. And I was, as I said, one of the few, I think I may have been the first person, I don't know if I said it, but I'll say it now, to go to Harvard and try to get both a law degree and a PhD in economics.
Wow.
Slacker.
Slacker.
You could have pushed harder on it.
I could have done better. I know.
Did you also do theater?
No, I did not get a divinity degree. Forgot to get the divinity degree. But Charlamagne the God is here, so you can help with that. No, it's not. This is not about me. It is about your point, Stacey, which is we cannot let the racism, the bigotry in society undermine our own sense of what we can do.
Right.
The truth of the matter is, if we don't do the best we can, then society is just going to get worse. not better.
And we want people to see people like you. This modest man was one of the most powerful men in the economic history of the country, and he's a black man, and few people know you exist. And something really interesting that happened just before President Obama won his first election, weeks beforehand, when we saw that it looked like he was going to win, credit counseling agencies, agencies that help people become entrepreneurs, money management, they saw the number of blacks coming into those agencies for help triple because of that audacity of hope and their belief that, wow, somebody is in my corner. And, having those role models. And that's why, it's always that piece that we can't touch of, financial wellness. But before you can, invest more money, before you can do those things, again, you have to have, some shift that will, make you seek out the help that you need. And again, some confidence. And we appreciate the resources that TIAA.org provides for free for people to go and check out. But Roger being here.
What are those resources? I know TIAA you manage like $1 trillion worth of assets, right?
Right,
but everybody can do stuff, not just
$1.3 trillion.
Right,
so,
but everybody can do stuff. And so you're absolutely right. So what we talk about is a number of things. First is we have a number of millennials who talk about their life journey and the things that they did. Back to your point, if you can see it, maybe you can believe in it. And so we thought that having millennials talk about how they've made progress through their financial life at a young age and the trade-offs they had to deal with would be an important thing. We've also supported a number of what we call gamifications, which are tools that use the fact that folks like to play online games, but to teach financial literacy. And they teach about savings and managing your debt and different kinds of investments and the broad purpose of diversification. So it's those sorts of things that we absolutely are doing. We also, for those who are saving with us, give them a chance to see how much their saving is going to result to in terms of lifetime income. We're a retirement company. So there are a range of tools.
And anyone can use these services.
Anyone can use most of these services. And the point is basically to try to increase the degree of financial literacy that we have in this country. Because it is low for everybody, but it's particularly low for black people. Stacey mentioned a little bit, we have something called the PFIN index, and we saw that for white folks, they get about 55% of the answers right. Unfortunately for blacks, it's about 33%. The thing that we seem to know best as a community is something about debt management and credit, because we're exposed to that. Where we tend to be worse is on the investments, and we're very bad on understanding how to use insurance, for example.
Right.
And so there's a lot that we can learn, and we help to teach as best we can.
The black community, for good reason, has a lack of trust in the financial services industry and a lack of trust in investing. And people, even blacks who invest are nervous investors. They're the first people to sell in the stock market. Talk a little bit about that and how does the industry get our trust back and get us in there?
So look, we have to start with the fact that the trust was lost for, frankly, unfortunately, good reasons, right? When we look at what happened in the subprime crisis, a fair amount of that came from very large financial services companies, some of them banks, some of them mortgage lenders that frankly were mis-selling the products.
Right.
And so there's no doubt that the financial services industry has got to sort of right its ship by making sure it's doing the right thing. Having said that, I think the other thing we can do is come forward with more products and services that are of the type that everybody needs. One of the things I'm proud of about in my company is, I just told this story to our town hall the other day. One of our, we call them participants, a person who stayed with us, worked in gluing the backs on the books. He was called a bookbinder. Never made more than $22,000 during his whole career, starting out of high school and worked through. He ended up saving over $400,000 nest egg, showing
That's
that you
amazing.
can do it.
Wow.
It is amazing. The third thing that we offer, so we offer very good products and services that have a good return over the cycle, and also you need to link that with good professional advice. And so there are lots of ways that one can take even a modest amount and build into something meaningful. But it does require having a plan. It does require managing debt well. It does require investing across different kinds of assets, both bonds and equity. And it does involve dealing with an advisor who really understands what you want to do and does the best he can.
So
for you.
diversification is important, having things that are
Diversification is very
steady.
important.
Maybe they don't grow as quickly, but then also diversifying into perhaps something riskier.
Absolutely, you put your finger on it. It's a balanced diversification, and what I see often in our community is people, I don't want to generalize too much, but people are asking for what's that one big idea that's
Right,
going to
they want to just blow up.
that's going to blow up and suddenly make you rich. And the
Not
truth-
realizing how rare those things are.
exactly not
For anybody.
realizing how rare they are for anybody, and not realizing that if it's going to go up, it could come down quickly too. And so what you want, I think what people want is, as you say, a broadly diversified set of investments, some of which are steady, 2, 3, 4% a year, and some of which may shoot the lights out and be really powerful, but then you have to recognize they could also be losers. And the other thing that you have to recognize is what you are comfortable with.
Right.
So your point, often the stock market, any market can be volatile, and you have to understand when things go down, are you going to be that person to sell? I hope not. Or are you going to be the one that can hold on? And so understanding what makes you sleep well at night is going to be important around these financial matters, and that's why diversification and understanding your own risk tolerance are both important things.
And tech has never made it easier. I know the Breakfast Club has given us an opportunity with Wealth Wednesdays to introduce people to apps that help you invest, help you choose your investment. So, and we're big on the message, you don't need to be rich to invest. But as we I know we just have a few more minutes with you here, but it feels like the elephant in the room when it comes to closing the wealth gap and everything. Home ownership. While blacks are, making great gains on the income side, black home ownership levels are at their lowest level in history, while white home ownership is on the rise. And when you consider that, most wealth is built through passing on home ownership, and blacks have, it's like heartbreaking. It makes me cry when I read about what's happened to blacks in the housing market, how we weren't allowed to participate, how when our veterans came home from war, they weren't allowed to buy homes, redlining. It's just been a crisis, and we still have these problems. And I've heard researchers go so far as to say that home ownership is the cause of the wealth gap, and until that home ownership piece of the puzzle gets solved, that the wealth gap is never going to close. And that's why, we like companies like fintech companies that allow anybody to get a mortgage. But talk about the home ownership piece.
Look, you start, unfortunately, with the sad history, which is even going back to the FHA, the Federal Housing Administration. They refused to write insurance or mortgages in communities that were integrated. It was a very sad story, but in fact, they were ones that drove what we think of as redlining. The fact that the modern homes after the Second World War were out in the suburbs, and they were all white, and blacks were left to second and third tier homes in the cities. Unfortunately, was part of a government policy in the past, no doubt. Point two, home ownership is one of the vehicles towards creating family wealth that can pass on from generation to generation. Point three, and this is the flip side of it, we also saw during the subprime crisis individuals jumping to get in the homes that they couldn't afford.
Right.
And so I agree with you. Home ownership is one of the tools towards wealth generation, but like anything else, got to be used in a really smart way. Diversify. Don't buy more home than you can manage. Understand what your mortgage payments are going to look like. And so it's like any other tool. Yep, it can be part of the solution if done wisely. It can be part of the problem if done poorly.
Right.
And so back to financial literacy, back to education, back to getting to the right kinds of jobs. All this is creating what I describe as a very positive ecosystem around finances. And you're right, technology can be an important way to handle it. And I like your point as well. You don't have to be rich in the usual sense in order to invest. You can start, look at my own family, small and build up slowly over time.
And that helps with your confidence also.
It absolutely helps with your confidence. There's nothing like looking at that that statement once a year and seeing that it's actually gone up.
Right.
And so, there are some tools.
And the earlier you start, the better.
Earlier you start, the better. If you have a job, sign up for your retirement plan. As a young person, if you get a credit card, use it very, very wisely. Pay it off. Don't pay off just the minimum and build up a lot of debt. And if you are in school and find you have to borrow some money, that makes sense. but borrow consistent with what your earning potential is likely to be,
Right.
and have a plan for paying. So, yeah, we can create out of the wealth that Stacey's talked about an even better outcome. And the final point I make, I saw a study from a big consulting firm, McKinsey & Company, that said if we can close the wealth gap between blacks and whites, we can actually add somewhere between 4 and 6% of this huge GDP, the gross domestic product, the size of our economy, just by closing that wealth gap.
Right.
And so this is something that we talk about as black people, but it's actually a huge societal importance. We as a
Everybody.
society can
would
be
help everyone.
much better off if we close this wealth gap that exists. And, that's why the Wealth Wednesday discussion, I think, is so incredibly important.
Well, this went. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say, if anybody finds it helpful on my site, mindmoneymedia.com, I have a webinar, You Don't Need to Be Rich to Invest. And if you follow us at Wealth Wednesdays on Instagram, or me on Instagram, which is Stacey Tisdale 1120, we have a lot of information and resources that can help you as well.
Well, that's it. I was gonna tell you to give out your websites and
You
Instagram
say it.
stuff.
No, now you say it.
I
I need the touch of God.
What's the Wealth Wednesday in for you?
So yeah, you can just follow us at Wealth Wednesday on Instagram. We have that page. Fortunately, we managed to get that. And I just have one last quick question. I always hear about Social Security going away, right? And I hear this like, oh, you have to make sure you retire because you can't rely on Social Security. We don't know what's happening with that. And as somebody who would really know, can you break that down?
So let me break it down for you as best I can. So first thing you understand is there is what's called a trust fund, which is just a big pot of government bonds that's behind Social Security. What the trustees, the people who run Social Security, have told us is that by 2033, they will only be able to pay out about 75% of their promised benefits. Now, 2033 is near, but not tomorrow.
Right.
The second part of the story is there are some changes that they can make in Social Security that will make it solvent for long periods of time. And so we shouldn't panic and think it's not going to be there. I think the issue is to sort of drive for the kinds of reforms that are necessary to make this much more sustainable. So I think Social Security will be around. There's a risk it will pay only about 3/4 of what it's paid thus far. But that outcome is not, it's not chiseled in stone. There are some policy fixes that they can make that actually might make it sustainable.
Are they working on that?
They are talking about it. Working on it is a little strong.
Okay.
To be fair, this is not the first time that there have been issues around Social Security, and the government has a tendency to, create commissions or do other things to try to drive it. So count me in a middle ground on Social Security. It's not going to go away, but
Don't rely on it.
work has got to be done to make it more sustainable. And that's, though you don't talk about it here very much, that's why it's also important to go out and vote. Because at the end of the day, it's our elected officials that decide how these problems get fixed.
Just one quick thing on Social Security. The average American family leaves, it's estimated, $120,000 in unclaimed Social Security benefits on the table. And hopefully we'll be able to come back and talk more about that because it's so complicated and we don't understand how it works. There's something called the Viagra benefit. Like a lot of people.
Viagra benefit.
Yes. If you
use Viagra, you get Social Security?
That's a whole other show. But if you have dependent children, your own adopted whatever, they can claim half of your Social Security benefit. It doesn't take away what you get, but they can claim half of your Social Security benefit. If you were married for 10 years, even if you get a divorce, when you get Social Security, you can get half. Nobody's losing anything. They just pay you on top of that. You can get half of your partner's Social Security benefit. The manual is 5,300 pages approximately. The financial services industry does not make money off of Social Security, so you hear a much bigger conversation about retirement vehicles like 401ks and all those things, which are important too. But maximizing Social Security, that's something we're also going to be talking about on Wealth Wednesday this year because people are just
I don't know anything
leaving
about Social Security.
Now
tons of money on the table.
That's true. Are you also going to tell them to delay taking Social Security?
You're going to delay
taking.
We're coming back for a Social Security segment.
Yeah, I don't know anything about that.
Tiaa.org, you'll learn everything you need to know about everything. And we'll talk a lot more about it, but just remember the Viagra benefit.
And where's Wealth Wednesday, G?
Right here.
Oh, I thought
It's
y'all doing
right
it
here, and we'll be
tomorrow.
having one. We'll let you all know when the
Yeah,
next
we
one
didn't-
at the
we
Juice
didn't
Bar is
schedule
going to
the date
be.
yet.
Oh, okay.
But we'll let you guys know.
This
for
is
sure.
a Wealth Wednesday with
Got
Raja.
you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it.
Well, it's Roger Ferguson, Stacey Tisdale. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much for
Thank
inviting
you.
me.
Always
It's the
a
Breakfast
pleasure.
Club.
Thank you.
Thank you.